From the studios of Foxboro Cable Access, located in the center of Foxborough, Massachusetts, you are watching Around Foxborough.
Hello, and welcome to Around Foxborough, the show where we talk about the people, places, and things that make Foxborough the gem of Norfolk County. My name is Mark Rivard, and I am pleased to have as my guest today, Don Wilding. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here. Great to be back in Foxborough.
Yeah, well, you've been in Foxborough. You lived here for a while, and I'm sure people may even remember you as the former sports editor of the Foxborough Reporter.
Yeah, that was a long time ago now, from 1997 until 2005, and I actually lived here 8.5 years before that. So yeah, about 17 years. Wow. Total in Foxborough.
Well, I've been in Foxborough a little over 20 years, so I do remember, actually about 24 years, I think now. So I do remember your reporting in the sports section, because that's what I used to read.
Don in front.
Don in front.
Name of the column. Yeah.
But lately you've been spending, living out on the Cape and writing about the storms.
The storms, yeah.
And your latest book, Historic Storms of Cape Cod. So what got you into the storm?
Well, the storms thing, it's actually part of the whole Cape Cod history kick of writing books I've been involved with for the last, since around the beginning of the millennium, I always say. And I had started off writing about the author Henry Beston, and he wrote a book called The Outermost House. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's a fan of that book knows how that house that Beston lived in, it was a very Thoreau-like type of setting, except it was on the beach. But the 20 by 16 house that he lived in was eventually lost to the ocean during the storm that we all know as the blizzard of '78. Mm-hmm. Down there, it was more of a tidal event than it was a snow event. That's how we all remember it mostly. But that, and along with my interest in that storm, because I remember it from living in New Jersey back in 1978, always had an interest in weather. And I had started writing about Cape Cod history, and then I wrote a book called A Brief History of Eastham, and followed that up with Shipwrecks of Cape Cod. Well, you got plenty of storms there. And that was followed by a book called Cape Cod and the Portland Gale of 1898, another storm. And from there, it was only natural, and I had already done a lot of programs and such, speaking programs and things like that about the blizzard of '78, and it just kind of grew from there. So I just finally got to the point after writing the Portland Gale book, it's time to do the storm book. So that's kind of how it grew from the blizzard of '78, and then it went on, I started finding all the other severe storms as well. So that's how it all came together, and finally finished it last fall, and voila, here we are. The book is out.
I remember '78 too. Let's see, my father was pulling me on a sled down the street to the local convenience store to get bread and milk. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a tall person now in my 50s, but back when I was 9 years old or 10 years, I think it was 9 when it happened, but the snow was here.
Yeah.
But on the Cape, as we were talking about earlier before the show, you don't get a lot of snow out there. You get the wind and the rain.
Yeah,
most of these
that's
storms.
what happened during that storm.
Yeah.
With the blizzard of '78. It wasn't really that. It started out as a lot of heavy snow, but it very quickly turned to rain. And it was a wind-driven rain. You had hurricane force wind gusts during this storm, and you had really abnormally high tides because it was a new moon tide. So you already had, the ocean is already at a very high level during a storm, and then the new moon makes it even higher. And with these wind gusts just driving all of this water onto the land, it did so much damage on the outer Cape, and it rearranged, totally changed Coast Guard Beach in Eastham, part of the Cape Cod National Seashore. A lot of damage was done, and it was a game changer as far as the landscape was concerned out on the Cape. So yeah, people still talk about it. That's why every time you go to Coast Guard Beach now in Eastham, you can't drive down onto the beach anymore. You have to take what they call a tram from up the road, a parking lot up the road, down to the beach. And that's still considered to be the #1 or one of the top 10 beaches every year by Dr. Beach. And but that storm totally changed the landscape there.
Wow. So what about 1938?
Oh my.
I heard stories about that from my dad.
Yeah, that's where you hear all the stories. Is the generations before us told the stories of that storm, and it was a killer storm. It killed probably over 600 people in New England. I think the number was closer to about 17 or 18 people on the Cape, but most of these were in the Buzzards Bay area. And the way that storm tracked was Cape Cod was just to the east of the eye, and that storm came barreling up out of nowhere, out of the ocean. And the track it was taking and the forward motion that it had, it was a Category 3 when it hit New England. It came ashore on Long Island and then again in Milford, Connecticut, and then it just kind of plowed right up through central Massachusetts and into Vermont. That's where it lost its hurricane status. So that just shows you how strong this storm. Usually they lose it. They get knocked out when they hit the shore. This one kept going, and it did unbelievable amounts of damage. And with the Cape being to the east of the eye, that means you are facing the worst wind in a hurricane. If you're to the west, you're going to get more of the heavy rain. Mm-hmm. When you're to the east of it, that's when you get the severe winds. This drove the tides into Buzzards Bay. There was a 25-foot storm surge in Buzzards Bay. Wow. And so the damage along the coast was phenomenal. Falmouth, Woods Hole area had 8 feet of water in the streets. Providence, Rhode Island had 20 feet of water downtown. Wow. So this just gives you an idea of how severe this was. And it was a storm that nobody knew it was coming. Everybody was out, it was a beach day, really, for a lot of people. And the weather forecasts were not as advanced as they were. They were predicting rain. They had no idea what was heading their way. And when it finally hit, it was too late. You have to know when a hurricane is heading towards us, if it's off the coast of North Carolina or so, the Carolinas, that's where you need to know, you need to start getting prepared. Mm-hmm. Be ready for it. If you're not, it's too late. And that's when the damage happens. So with that storm, nobody knew what it was. In 1944, people were better prepared. There was a lot less in the way of fatalities.
Yeah, well, it takes a lot. Well, first of all, probably the weather forecasting, obviously, like you said, the technology got better, a little bit better, but also people, once they've been hit with something, they tend to, okay, something's coming now. Okay, I'm barreling it. I'm getting all my supplies, my bread and my milk, and water and things like that. And yeah.
Exactly. And when you're not ready for something like that, and you haven't experienced it in a while, that's when people are the most vulnerable. They know it's coming. They don't know it's coming, and so they're not prepared. In 1944, they were more prepared. And the same went for 1954 with Carol and Edna, 2 storms back to back within 12 days of each other. So with those coming, everybody was a little bit more ready for the storms. They weren't ready in 1938. They weren't ready really for the Portland Gale either in 1898. So a very severe nor'easter. So that's, you got to be ready. And in the case of 1938, people were not ready. So fortunately now things are much better, and that's the thing. You have to be ready. You have to know what to do and be prepared and pay attention to what the storm's doing. And at that point, you're going to have a lot less in the way of damage.
And even if you think you know what the storm's going to do, you never know 100%.
No, you don't.
You see it. You see the way it's rotating. Okay, it's going on the one more, and then all of a sudden, boom, it comes back, or it hits land and it turns into a tropical storm, which is basically it just goes.
Yep, it'll lose its tropical storm Henri a few years ago was one of those. There was one in 1996, Hurricane Edouard. Edouard was heading up along the East Coast, and in Labor Day weekend, it was forecast to strike Cape Cod. So there was a hurricane warning issued on Cape Cod Labor Day weekend of 1996 on Saturday. Sunday, the backup going off Cape went from the bridges all the way back to the Rotary in Orleans and Eastham. That's how far back it went, almost 40 miles.
Wow.
So you think next time you're stuck in traffic down there and you're sitting in maybe Sandwich, cursing out the traffic situation, remember that one.
It could be worse.
It could be a lot worse. And the thing is with Edouard was, you know, you've got the Cape, shape of the Cape there. Yeah. Edouard was headed right for it, and then it just turned and went out to sea, just kind of brushed the Cape. It was no worse than a regular nor'easter. So yeah, they are very, very unpredictable at any given time. They can just do all kinds of weird things.
And I was reading just recently that this could be a very active hurricane season coming up.
Yeah.
We haven't really been hit with one in a long time.
We are very overdue just for a hurricane.
Yeah.
One of the people I talked to for this book was from the National Weather Service, a longtime Foxborough resident, Glenn Field. And Glenn told me, he said, it's not just a case of, you know, regular hurricane hitting us. Something in the ballpark of the 1938 hurricane is going to hit us again. And it's not a question of if it's going to, it's when it's going to. It's going to happen again. There's been records of storms, of, you know, monstrous storms like the 1938 storm hitting us. Back in 1635, of Plymouth Plantation, it was written about a monster hurricane storm where the storm surge was something like 20, 25 feet in Buzzards Bay. So they've had it before. It'll happen again too. There's no question about it. It's just when it's going to happen.
Yeah, and the weather patterns these days, the last few years, have been kind of crazy around the country. So anything goes. I mean, when you have tornado warnings like we had last year, I mean, really? Tornado warnings?
I knew you had them down here. It was just down on, I think it was East Street, off of East Street.
Yeah.
Down in that area. But also on the Cape. We had several of them over the last few years. There was one just last year. I was out walking in it and I got caught in the rain. But then when I kind of looked to the west and I could see this very dark sky, and I was in Dennis at the time, I just said, I better get in now. And but also it was because there was a tornado warning in effect. A tornado had touched down in Osterville and was actually passing through Dennis, not too far from where I was. So it's, yeah, there was a lot of tornado activity. There was also, I think it was in 2019, there was a tornado that came ashore around Hyannis. It was a waterspout. Came ashore around Hyannis, lifted, and then touched down again in Yarmouth, in West Yarmouth, South Yarmouth area, tore the roof off of a hotel. Wow. Along Route 28. Then again, it lifted, and then touched down again around Harwich. So it kind of followed Route 28 all the way across the Cape, and it finally lifted again somewhere near Chatham. And so that's kind of unusual, seeing tornadoes of that frequency that we've seen over the last few years on the Cape. And yeah, I do touch on those storms as well. I went through a lot of the other notables of the 20th century and 21st century, but I focused mostly on those 8 storms: 1938, 1944, the 2 in 54, the 78 blizzard, the 1987 nor'easter that busted through Chatham Bar, basically, and in 1991, Hurricane Bob and the perfect storm.
The perfect storm, yeah. Talk about that, because everybody, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the movie, the Andrew Gale and everything, but the storm itself, I mean, that was just
it was a combination of 3 weather systems. There was a front coming in. There was also a low pressure area up over off of Canada, and there was a hurricane. Hurricane Grace was kind of fading as it was moving up, and the 3 of them just came together. And it was off somewhere around Newfoundland, I think it was, and it just wound around, just kept winding around out in the ocean for about 4 or 5 days before it finally gave out. And we felt it up here, because I was living in Foxborough at the time. I remember it was Halloween, and it was rainy and very windy. And I can remember, well, we took the kids out trick-or-treating because the rain had stopped, so, and everybody else was out. So we figured, okay, we're okay. But that storm was, you know, everybody knows it for the movie and what happened to the Andrea Gale and everything. But the damage it did on the Cape was phenomenal. It was, they said they hadn't seen tides like that since the blizzard of '78. Again, a lot of structural damage as well. So it was originally, everybody knows it now as the perfect storm. But they used to, actually when the Weather Service was naming it, they didn't know what to call it because Hurricane Grace was involved, and they were actually going to call that one Hurricane Henri originally, but it was so complicated, they didn't want to confuse the public as to what to name it. So they ended up just coming up with the name of the Halloween nor'easter or the no-name storm. I think the official name for it originally was the Halloween nor'easter of October 1991. And they ended up, then everybody was calling it the no-name storm because it didn't really have a name otherwise. And then finally the perfect storm came up between Sebastian Younger and Bob Case of the National Weather Service were kind of tossing the names around, and they came up with the name Perfect Storm. And yeah, it kind of was a perfect situation, but a lot of these storms, especially the nor'easters, they're kind of perfect in their own way. The blizzard of '78 fits that description as well. So, and the Portland Gale as well. So, you know, you can call a lot of storms perfect.
Perfect pains,
perfect
a lot of
pains
them.
is exactly right. Yeah, that's true.
So another one I saw in here too, Hurricanes Carol and Edna, 54?
Yeah.
Were those two back to back? How did that work?
12 days apart.
Wow.
See, this was a pattern where during the 20th century, between 1938, there was actually another hurricane in 1936 that kind of more brushed the Cape. But then there was 1938, and then the 44 storm. And then again, you had those 2 in 54, and they were one was on August 31st, that was Carol, and then I think it was September 12th, came Edna, another storm. And Carol was a Category 3, kind of a twin really to the 38 hurricane, very similar in terms of its strength, and it didn't move quite as fast as the 38 hurricane, but that too did a lot of damage. And then 12 days later, you get Edna coming up. That's a Category 2. Edna tracked right across the Cape, just to the east of Falmouth, and actually pulled a lot of water into Cape Cod Bay as it was pulled in a phenomenal high tide into Wellfleet as it was pulling out. So that storm also was responsible for nearly grounding a lightship called the Nantucket Lightship. They somehow survived. There was also the Vineyard Lightship in the 1944 hurricane, where the crew members 12 men died. They were overcome by the power of that, and they were ordered to stay out at sea too during that storm, which was most unfortunate. I've got stories about both of that in the book as well. But it was those two hurricanes back to back, and even in the 50s, there were quite a few other hurricanes that came very close. Esther was another one in 55. Hurricane Diane dropped a lot of rain on the area, particularly on Cape Cod. Provincetown had 6 inches of rain from it. And then you got into the 1960 Hurricane Donna did a lot of damage. I have photographs in the book from Hurricane Donna that hit the Lighthouse Inn in West Dennis they were very good about giving me a lot of information and photographs, because the damage done to that place, if you've ever been to it, it's out on West Tennis Beach, right smack on the water, facing it. And they had all kinds of damage done during all of those hurricanes, but particularly the 1944 hurricane. They had just built a new dining room addition. This is after new owners had bought it, right around the 1938 hurricane. 44, they built this new dining area. In June, and in September, the hurricane hits, destroyed it, just completely swept it over the beach and into the Weir River area out in the back. So you had a really bad situation there, where they had to try to completely rebuild as best as they could afterwards. So the damage done by all these hurricanes all at once was really something. And then now, since then, you know, the only real hurricane since then has been Bob. Yeah. The only actual hurricane. So that's the last time we've seen a hurricane. We're due.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I do remember Gloria, though. Gloria, because I heard Laura Branigan about 75,000 times.
Way more than you wanted
Between
to,
that
probably.
and The Doors and Van Morrison.
Yeah.
All I heard was Gloria.
Gloria was tough in this area. But once you got out onto the Cape, the Falmouth felt winds of 96 miles an hour during Gloria. But the further east you went, the less you felt from Gloria, because Gloria actually tracked up the Connecticut River Valley. So when Gloria came ashore, it lost its punch very quickly, and we felt it around here pretty hard. But yeah, once you got out onto the Cape, it was not a high impact storm as much as it was if you were on the Upper Cape in the canal area. And that was true with some of the other storms as well. But even those other storms, 38, 44, were much further east, and they still managed to whack even the Outer Cape pretty hard. So you could feel it from even if the storm is right in the middle of Massachusetts. Boom, you're going to feel it out there.
It's hard to believe it's been like 30 years since we've had a major hurricane.
Yeah,
and you know, you're right.
I always expect one to hit. You know, they always have the warnings, you know, or the reports saying, okay, one's headed this way, and you know, they're on top of everything now. You know, they track it ever so closely, and yet they still aren't always sure where it's going to land. You know, the eye comes ashore just a little further, or a little further east, or a little further west, makes a big difference. Yeah. So yeah, but it's going to happen. Yeah.
I mean, Sandy was probably the closest that came to us, and that was, you know, south.
We were kind of brushed by Sandy more than anything, even though there was a phenomenal high storm surge that hit the Cape and coastal Massachusetts. But Sandy's impact was felt much more down towards New York City and the Jersey Shore than it was here. We lucked out a little bit when it came to Sandy. I mean, I can imagine what it would have done if it came just a little further north. Yeah. It would have been in big trouble.
Yeah, just a bit. So, oh no, I can't wait. I want to read this book, because this is the unbelievable stories, you know, because especially the research you had to do for some of the older ones, because trying to find people who were around in 38 and 44.
That's hard.
Yeah.
They're not around. I mean, I did track down a lot of people who were involved with the 78 storm, and also even Hurricane Bob. I talked to one woman in Provincetown who was I went to the Sandcastle Resort, which is just over the line in Provincetown from Truro, and that place had their roof torn off during Hurricane Bob. And it turns out the manager there was a woman who was living on Commercial Street in Provincetown at the time of the storm. And she told me, oh yeah, I was out walking around, because we weren't getting a lot of rain. We were getting a lot of wind. There was a ton of wind. But she says, I'm walking out and there's people out in the streets, they're having hurricane parties. And then all of a sudden, I look up and I see a roof flying by. Somebody's roof was flying by. Wow. She says, I went in after that. That was it for me. You know, so, you know, you get stories like that. And I have a lot of different stories that came that way. But yeah, finding 38, 44, I had to rely on the newspapers. Because the newspapers also going forward, 20 years after a storm or 30 years after a storm, whatever, landmark anniversaries. Mm-hmm. They love to interview people who, kind of doing what I'm doing here. Yeah. But they track down some of these old timers in their coverage areas, and yeah, they told some amazing stories. And it's great that it's there for people to look back on and know that this kind of thing happened before and it can happen again. So that's the great thing. You've got the warnings, at least, or at least that got that one step ahead. Yeah. But not much more.
That's about it. Excellent. So I think we should let everybody know that you're going to be in the area on August 6th at the Mansfield Public Library?
That's correct, yeah. And I've spoken there a few times before. But yeah, always great to go there. Mansfield's another place that I spent a lot of time in, lived there, worked there for the Mansfield News prior to my time in Foxborough and with the Sun Chronicle. So I spent 36 years working for newspapers, and over half of that was around here. So I'm pretty used to the whole area. But yes, I'll be there on August 6th and very much looking forward to that.
Great. So if they want to find out more about you, where can they go?
My website is DW, my initials, CapeCod.com. And that has everything you want to know, whether books I've written, and there's links to buy the books, schedule of events, which I'm constantly updating and monitoring, links to my social media pages, past media presentations on what I've done and things like that. It's all things Don Wilding, I guess. So you can find everything you want to know there.
Everything you always wanted to know but were afraid to ask, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, Don,
that's for sure.
Thank you so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it. And people, Historic Storms of Cape Cod, check it out.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. And that'll do it for Around Foxborough. Have yourself a great day.